Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. We want to welcome the Holy Spirit into this conversation. And as we talk about creativity and life, we will love to do it in the presence of the one who created all life and the creator itself. So let's go ahead and get started.
Amen.
Mary, welcome into this beautiful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for even thinking of me. I feel extremely honored.
Well, you have beautiful work. I love the black and whites, but we're going to get into the artwork in a little bit. I just want to let people know, Mary and I were having this beautiful conversation before we started recording. So just heads up, if you get offended by the name Jesus or talking about a Judeo-Christian perspective on faith and God, if that offends you, I apologize slightly. You can always turn this off, move on, go somewhere else, or you can listen and enjoy it as well. And if it doesn't offend you and if it excites you, then welcome. This specific conversation will be a blessing to you all. So with that said, ding, ding. You were sharing with me, Mary, your faith, like how you came into love with Jesus.
Yes, what a nice way of putting it, because that's exactly how I feel. I really do. I was telling you that when I was raised in a family of there was a bunch of us kids. My dad is quite a famous Western artist, and we'll talk about art later. I get that, but we had a bunch of kids because my mother was Catholic, but we never were really taught anything about God, Jesus, or the Bible. And when I was about 15, I went to pick up my horse. I had a quarter horse that I rode all the time in Colorado. And I went to pick her up from the pasture where I kept her. And there was a whole bunch of Christians there having a picnic. And they invited me over to talk to them. And I started talking to them and was overcome with intense emotion that I had no clue where it came from. And decided that, yes, whatever this was, I wanted this. And I said, yes, this is what I want. And tears flowed down my face. And I just was so overwhelmed. I went home, excitedly told my mother, and she just kind of rolled her eyes and shook her head and walked away. I love my mother to death, but she did not relate to it at all. And so I had really no support in that decision that I'd made and that discovery I'd made. I would say it's more of a discovery because whatever they were saying to me was not as important as to what I was experiencing deep inside. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I went on living my life just like everyone else in the secular world, according to what our current culture was at the time. And having been involved in art all my life, I was always drawn to it, always studied, bought art books, went to bookstores, which they had everywhere back then, don't so much anymore, and just pored over the art. But since that moment in the pasture, could not keep myself away from images of Jesus, not images of anything else that's religious. None of the other religious things, but just him. And I couldn't not look. There was something in his eyes, and I kept collecting art books with him, paintings of him. And one day I remember I was sitting in my car reading a book, and I had a bookmark that I had made. I don't know. Do you ever make bookmarks? I do that because I just like
long time ago. I made a few, but
okay.
I don't
It's
have
a fun
any
thing
books
to
to put them in anymore.
Yeah, they're all on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I had made a bookmark with a picture, a painting of Jesus on it, and I couldn't the eyes, and I just thought, what do you want from me, God? Just what do you want? And the way I would describe it to my friends is, I feel stalked, like I got this stalker. I'll turn around every, certain times in my life, and he's there, like following me, and I'm like, what do you want from me? I told my mom, you want something, what is it? She said, I have no idea. So I just continued to flounder in my life, and really, as the older I got, the more I floundered. I did whatever I wanted to do, whatever the culture told me was all right, and my life was very difficult. Now, look, I know everybody's life is difficult, no matter if you're Christian or religious or not. This world is a difficult place. But mine eventually got to the point where I just thought, I just can't do it anymore. It's just too much. And I remember telling my mom, I called her up and I said, I can't do it anymore. I just want out. And I guess she really heard it in my voice. And I hung up the phone and I sat down I lay down on my bed, but I didn't go to sleep. I don't even think I know I didn't even close my eyes, because I remember looking around the room while I was experiencing this thing. But all of a sudden I was, I'm going to cry. I will try not to. I was surrounded by angels, and they were going all around me, and they were the most beautiful thing. Don't have the words. And look, I'm a writer, but I don't have the words for that. And the sound coming out of their mouths, it was just unbelievable. And I thought, why are you surrounding me? You guys are supposed to be praising God. And I believe they were with the song, but they were around me. And the feeling I was getting from them is, we know how hard it is to be a human. And all of a sudden I was in front of him, and there was no man, person, image, nothing, just a presence. And it was undescribable. And it was not what people tell you it is. There was absolutely no judgment, nothing but intense, the most intense, pure love I ever felt. And it went both ways. And all I could think was, you don't understand how awful I am, and I do not deserve this love. I thought, you don't know what I've done in my life. And all I got back was, you are the most charming, remarkable, beautiful, exceptional creation in the entire universe. That's all I got. And boom, I was out of it. I stood up. I thought, how on earth do I explain what just happened to me to people? And I was so afraid they'd think I was crazy that I said, okay, I'll just tell them it was a dream. It was not a dream. Whatever it was, and I still don't know, it was not a dream. So I called my mother and told her about it. And she said, do you know that after your phone call to me, I called everyone I knew. Hundreds of people eventually were praying for you. And I just think it happened because of that. I have no other explanation.
Wow. That's incredible.
It was incredible. And then later in my life, I told someone, the Christian religion is wrong. God does not judge you. He thinks you're wonderful, absolutely incredible. And someone eventually told me, Mary, do you understand that's because when he was looking at you, he knew you were one of his. You'd given yourself to Christ. It was like he was looking at his son. You were that perfect because you had him. And it clicked in me. Oh, okay. that makes sense. And for me, that was everything. It just completely changed my life. And I suddenly started investigating what this whole thing was about to other people, this whole Christianity thing. And reading the Bible, read it cover to cover twice. God, there's some boring parts in that thing. Have you ever read it?
Mm-hmm.
There are some parts that are really misery to get through. But there are so many incredible parts too. And as I continue doing art, I'm a writer, I'm a graphic designer, and I'm a painter. And as I continue doing those things, it began to occur to me that it wasn't me doing it. It was God doing it. And I know a lot of artists say this, and I should have figured this out sooner than I did. But we all like to get, to feel good about when people praise us for our creativity. And I liked that too. But I began to realize when I would do something really remarkable, it was almost like I wasn't there. And it would really only happen when I got out of the way. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I was younger, I won a lot of awards, and art students and artists would get angry at me because I would say, they're like, "Oh, you created that," and I would say, "I didn't create anything." They're like, "What?" And I say, all I do is listen. I'm the hand. I listen, and I'm a tuning fork. So It's not about me imposing what I want to do. It's about me hearing, and then as it comes through me, part of me goes into it as well, because it's like putting the other day I used this idea of if you have a grape branch, right, and you want to make wine, you take those seeds and put them in the ground, and it'll grow grapes that you can use for wine. But the soil in which the soil in which that grape comes out of, and the way the angle of the sun hits it, and the climate, and all this thing, will make the wine taste different, right?
Yes.
So you can take the same grape seed from the same original vine and put it in different places of the earth, and it will have a different taste because of the Torah, right? So Therefore, we can hear the Creator, we can hear the Spirit, we can attach to the Muse like a tuning fork. We're trying to get as clear of a sound as possible, and we let that come out. But because it's coming out of us, it will bring some of our Torah, right? Mm-hmm. And so that might form itself into a certain style or whatever. But the key is to be hooked to the source, to hear the source, to do what you see, right, from the inside out. And some of the things you wrote that I saw the other day were spot on. They were spot on. You get it. You see it. And
I cannot tell you how much I love that explanation. Did you come up with that?
Well, I could say I did. But the answer is that, yes, it came out of me.
It's amazing.
Did I come up with it? No. Just hearing it.
That's exactly what it is. I love that so much. What a great way to think of it. I think that's the truth.
It's interesting. As I'm studying classics, I was just reading the Republic. I think it was by Plato, and he was talking about Socrates. And Socrates, and I'll probably end up sharing this a lot over the next several podcasts as it comes up. But he talked about, he was actually talking with this fellow called Ion about art and painting and furniture making and poetry. And he was explaining to this guy why he's not an artist and why the guy he's imitating, Homer, was not an artist, even though people loved Homer's work. And he used this analogy of a magnet. And you'll really get this because this is really the same exact concept of Christ, is that there's a magnet, and the magnet, it has a force. And when you take a metal ring and you attach it to the magnet, it binds to the magnet, right?
Right.
But what happens is the force of the magnet, it magnifies, it magnetizes the ring. It doesn't take anything away from the magnet. It expands itself through this other ring. And then you take another ring, and now that ring can be attached to the other ring, and it magnetizes, right? So this power flows through. And so what he's explaining, he said that, and he was using three layers and then the magnet, right? So imagine like a square as the magnet and three circles.
Okay.
So the magnet, he said, is God, and it's or through the muse, right? It's that spirit. And the artist attaches, it has direct communication to the muse or to the God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first ring. But what happens often is then another one will come along and become an interpreter of that which the artist interpreted from the spirit, right? And then usually then the performer will come along, someone who performs that which was interpreted, right? And and so his whole point was like, what we want to do is become inspired. And when you're inspired, you're connected to the source, right? So as an artist, we don't want to be just copying a tree that we see in nature.
Right.
We want to come to the source and have a relationship with the source and say, what was it that you created here? And if you ask these questions, and all of a sudden you may do a series of paintings that have trees and feels like that area, but no one can find that place because all of a sudden you start seeing places that don't exist that exist within that place. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
Yeah, and there are a lot of great artists. That's what they're doing. They're tapping into that. They're seeing. Go look at Van Gogh. We were talking about Van Gogh.
I was just going to say that.
Exactly, right?
He was tapped into what you are describing. And did you know that he was going to be a preacher? I'm sure you did.
Yeah, actually, he was, right?
Yeah. He tried it and failed like everything else he did because he was supposed to be an artist.
Yeah, he was supposed to visualize it, not he was supposed to have visual rhetoric, not audio.
Yes.
Verbal rhetoric. Wow. So okay, so now you're having this experience. Your spiritual experience is at a whole nother level. What do you do with that? Like how did you come to a place where you connected that to your art?
Well, it's when I got to that place, all I wanted to do, I'm sure like everyone else that experiences that, is express that what that is. And I was told by everybody I know, you can't paint that. If you do, it's not popular nowadays. You can paint Jesus, you can paint religious scenes, but that's been done a million times. Nobody cares. And I just thought, it doesn't matter. I don't care if anybody cares. And I don't care if I sell these. It does not matter. And they just looked at me like I was ignorant, but it didn't matter. I just thought, I have to do it. I have to do it. And so I would occasionally do, if you looked at my art, you see a Western tinge to it, a direction to it. I did that because, well, number one, I grew up with horses and love them. And I love the Western lifestyle. It's a uniquely American. Yes, I know it comes from South America, but it was made into a uniquely American thing, and that I really connect with. So love that and do that. But I'm always torn away from that to paint something about God, or for me, Jesus. They're the same thing for me.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. Because you do see that Western feel, even like in the it appears that even the shape of your rectangles has that similar shape that you would see a lot of Western art in. I don't know if that's...
No, what do you mean? The shape of my canvases?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's something when I look at it, even just like the container in which your art is is within the field. It's very simple for me to say, oh yeah, I can see a Western in there, you know.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Why did how do I want to go with this? Well, I'll just ask. Why do you paint in like the black and whites?
Oh, I only started painting, like I told you, 18 months ago. I had tried to paint when I was about 25 years ago and fell in love with it. Did that thing that I think a lot of artists do where I forgot about eating and sleeping and showering, much to my husband at the time's dismay, but was so just consumed with it. I just really didn't want to do anything else, and made the mistake of trying to get my father's advice on it. And he's very, very good at what he does and very knowledgeable, but he was very hard on any of us kids that tried to paint. Very, very hard on us. And as an artist, I have like that missing layer of skin that we seem to have for protection. And it just crushed me. And I just couldn't handle it. I stopped painting when I was excited because I had painted a picture of a black woman, a jazz singer. It came out very atmospheric and beautiful, and someone offered to buy it right away when I showed it to them. So excited. I went to my dad and I said, Dad, they want to buy this. What should I charge? And he said, how much did you pay for the canvas? And that was it. And I just thought, okay.
Really?
Yeah.
He put no value in the work?
No value whatsoever. And I thought, I can't. It's too hard.
That sucks.
Yeah.
I was like ready to hear some great wisdom. Like, how much did you pay to the canvas and charge, 3.49% of that, whatever. I'm like, whoa, that's cool. How does you price it?
No, he was saying it isn't worth anything yet. And he did say, well, it's, I was just starting but it was harsh, he was harsh, and I couldn't do it. And I gave it up. It never occurred to me that I could continue painting and not get his advice or show my work to him. I just, he was too big of a name and too big of a force in my life to think of that. And I think I wish I had continued painting, but then again, I also think everything happens in the right time. Yeah. So
one of my mentors always says, you only meet yourself. You only meet yourself. And one day I went to ask my dad for advice on something. And at that time, I was never really good with money, right? So if I had money, I'd blow it, things like this. But I was maturing and I had some money saved up. But so I asked him about something and he said, oh, no, because, once you get money, you're going to blow it and blah, 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 blah. And but he was speaking the truth, but he was speaking the truth to a different version of me, right? And I just felt low, and I'm like, and then I'm driving and I'm like, wait a second. And I have to do this a lot, like where I have to realize where I am now and not see myself as I was maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, right? Like, and these things, and see yourself truthfully. And I'm like, wait, no, he's speaking out of a different story. And I was angry with him. And then I realized what my friend said, you only meet yourself. So I realized that wasn't my dad talking to me. That was me talking to me, right?
Wow, interesting. I love that.
And so by forgiving myself, I was able to forgive him and walk with this incredible amount of confidence. And now I'm to a place where it's like, I don't even want my dad's opinion or my brother's opinion, because in the end, who cares? Like, it's your choice, right? It's what you're doing. And I realize I don't need to seek approval. The one who needs to approve it is me.
Yes, I believe that. But did you ever stop wanting knowledge from people that you knew were very, very good at what you were trying to do?
Absolutely. But then this is the thing. If you want knowledge, you have to go in with specific questions. right? You have
Yeah.
to know, like, and you have to come at them either on their level or above their level. But if you're going as a little daughter, as an adult, still going in the energy of a little daughter,
Right.
And he has this, whatever it might be, don't look at that as him. That's you saying, stand up like a woman.
Where were you back then?
I just had to do that to myself the other day, right? Like, for example, I was reading this thing out of The Art of War, and it talked under leadership. It had these 5 characters, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, courage, yeah, integrity, yeah, knowledge, da da da. And when it got to discipline, there was a block in me, right? And I said to my mentor, I said, oh, the river stopped. It dammed up, right? And I said, well, how? Because I began to think of myself as a non-disciplined person, right?
Okay.
Because it's something I struggled with throughout my life, like, starting things, not finishing, things like that.
Yeah.
Then I stopped and I'm like, wait a second. I get up at 2 or 3 in the morning every day and pray for about an hour and a half to 4 hours before I start my day, right? That level of discipline. So who are you talking about? Right? Like, this is a conversation I had with myself this week. I'm like, I do this, I clean this. Like, I'm just like, whoa, no. That thing was trying to tell me a lie, because the real story is I'm extremely disciplined at what I do. Right? And then
I love it.
Yeah. I had to rebuke my own self.
I love it. Well, when I started painting 18 months ago, my dad was much more. He's old. He's 93 now, and he was soft. Yeah, and he's been softened up a lot by my mother's death 5 years ago. A lot. They had a 50-year marriage and very, very close. But he's been very encouraging in the last 18 months, until I just showed him. I don't know if you saw the Jesus portrait on my website. Did you see it?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Showed him that, and he said, okay, look, Mary, I don't want to see any more of these until you've painted for at least a year, because these are all just looking the same. And I was like, oh, but you know what? It didn't affect me. It didn't bother me. I just thought he can't for whatever reason, and that's okay. And I went on painting, and I wasn't bothered. I don't know why, but I'm very grateful.
Well, I actually agree with him a little bit, to be quite honest. But I'll keep my dad coaching hat off for right now, okay?
No, don't keep your coaching hat off. I want to hear it. I do.
Now, if you want my coaching hat, we have to talk about a price. But before that, no, I'm just joking. What I will say is, what happens is we get into these rhythms, and we aren't conscious of what we're designing. And this is one way. It's weird. We have to get out of our way, but sometimes getting out of our way actually means that we have to step up our game and become more conscious of what's going on. Right.
I understand that. I do.
So that we can actually get out of our way.
Yep.
And for example, there's a beautiful painter I worked with in Australia, and she had all these great paintings. But when I asked her, well, what is it that you're trying to communicate? And she tried to explain it, and she didn't realize that maybe it's because she's in Australia. I don't know. Everything flipped backwards. All her paintings that she wanted to communicate were backwards, right? So when you look at the design, she wanted to invite you into the picture, this and that, but they were all built on these sinister angles, which doesn't evoke welcoming into an image. It revokes like this secret, sacred, almost like you're not sure if you're allowed to enter in feel. And that was her personality too, right? Like it was weird. Like inside, she actually is this funny, bubbly, full of life, but her outside is very like standoffish. Don't get too close. And the artwork being a self-portrait, then what happens is when we got her to realize that, all of a sudden she started switching angles and boom, 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 boom. Like it started unlocking, So she had to become more aware of herself so that she could actually remove herself. And
wow, I'm so glad I met you, Don. You have the insights about art that are just really spot on, but I've not thought of them.
Man, I would love to work with you so that you could show a painting to your daddy and you're like, ah, I see angels.
My only thought when he said that really was, Dad, are you going to be here in a year? I don't know if he will. It's terrible to say that, but he's physically not doing very well, and I just really don't know. But it's fine. Everything goes the way it's meant to go. I do trust.
Do you have conversations with him about art without him looking at your stuff?
No, I've never been close to him, as I'm sure you've picked up on. And he was a very scary figure in my youth, a very rageful person, a very emotional person. And it was never safe to get close to him. So I've always really, really kept my distance from him. So the end result is that now that I'm an adult who's lived away from him for decades, I still don't feel comfortable.
Okay.
But he has so much. If I have something specific to ask him, he's great about that. Telling me like what's wrong with it, how to fix it, why it went that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. He likes to. He's a man. How do I fix this?
Is that what it is, Doug?
Yeah. I'm not here to get touchy-feely. Just give me a problem, I'm going to solve it.
Yes, but if you looked at his work, which you probably didn't have a chance to, but it's extremely emotional. Really? So it all comes out there.
After this call, I would love to get with you and do a video call and for us to look at some of his work.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you, my heart wants a healing to occur. And by healing, a reconciliation, just a touch point, right? Because if you don't get it, it will haunt you for the rest of your life. And you both deserve it. And it's there. That's the gospel, at the end of the day. So
we've both said to people that we care about, that we try, and there just is no way to connect. He said that to my mother when she was alive, and I say that to my husband.
Now you realize that's a total lie, right?
I don't realize that, Don, because I've wanted that all my life, but it does not work. And honestly, I'm not the only one of my siblings that feels that way.
Sure.
He's a difficult
Absolutely.
man. He's a wonderful
Absolutely.
man, and I love him with all my heart. But he's a difficult person too.
Yeah. My friend, she had this recurring dream because her dad was, he's still that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she had this recurring dream where she would walk through the house and there would be photos, but there would never be a photo of her dad, right? Mm-hmm. And she ended up meeting this guy who he was such a cool guy. And one night she had this dream and he was in the dream with her and they walked through this house together, right? And this time there was a picture that was laying down. And so they picked it up and it was a picture of her dad and together they put it on the wall, right?
Wow. What an impactful dream.
Oh, yeah. And it's became the root for a beautiful healing to occur that's still in process. So one day around Thanksgiving, I believe it was, she brought her sons to her dad's house and they did something. I think he was trying to show an old movie to them, right? And he wanted to really have them get into it, but they were just fooling around and he just got up and he yelled at them like, mm-hmm. disrespectful, blah, 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 right? And he blew up just like he always did. And so they left and her sons were like, you know what, Mom? about a day later, they came back and they said, I think we need to apologize, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, why? He should apologize. Because, we were disrespectful and da-da-da. And so they went. And it totally changed her dad, because he was blown away that his daughter's sons would man up at such an early age and take responsibility on that like he now wants them there all the time. Like it's cool. It was a cool story.
I love it.
Yeah. So when I see these things, and I'll share a story with you. My mother, my biological mother, she had she wasn't a very good woman, let's say. And she, in the end, she did a lot of bad things. Did drugs, alcohol, crack cocaine, all that stuff while I was in her stomach. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And then so I was born prematurely with this drugs and stuff. So when people ask me why I believe in God, it's not because I'm afraid of going to hell. It's because he gave me life. And so my appreciation of God is purely out of love and appreciation. It has nothing to do with fear, which is a very strange place, because most people, their foundation is built on fear. I don't want to die. I don't want to go to hell. Right.
Right.
That's so foreign to me. So maybe because I was coming out of the hell. Right. But, and so, she left me at the hospital. Right. I think that my aunt or uncle had to go and actually pick me out of the hospital. Ultimately, there was one moment when I was a kid that I remember us having some resemblance of peace in a home, but they lost a home, and then we ended up living in a crack house with drugs and rats and all kinds of nastiness. And at that time, she ended up disciplining my brother and broke his arm. He was only about 5 years old, so she had some major issues. And ultimately, once we were taken from her, she ended up brutally murdering my father and going to jail for it. And around, I don't know, 15, I guess I was, I had I went to this church with the foster parents that I had at the time. And now for a couple of years, ever since I was like 5, I was always seeking God. And around 12, I would have conversations about Jesus, with my therapist, because being raised in foster care, you had a therapist, and he'd always ask, well, do you want to know what the psychologist says or Jesus? And so we just have these. He ultimately got fired for it, but can't help too many kids.
Oh.
And
you were given him.
Exactly. And it was funny. Yeah. I met him about 6 months later. He's like, man, I made so much money when I got fired because I started my own private business. Shelly Shagley. Like, so financially, he blew up. Awesome. So that always encouraged me. But then I went to this church and I got what they call baptized in the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And from there, I had these dreams. So I had 2 dreams. The first one, if anyone says, well, like you had that experience where this figure came, you had this divine experience. And so I had this dream, which is why I'm so obsessed about design today. It's almost 30 years now. And so I saw this figure. I was like in this place where these big windows, I said, oh, I must be in heaven, because it was in the sky. It was this big banquet hall, like a cafeteria where all the tables were separated.
Okay.
And I was standing on this balcony looking down at it. And this figure, this dude came up to me, and it was weird. He had like fiery eyes, but he was an old man, but he was a young man, right? And he didn't speak to me. He spoke to me, but he never moved his mouth. Like I could just hear him. Right? Yes. And all he did is reach out his hand and put it on my shoulder with one hand. And then with the other, he waved it and it said, redesign it. Right. Now, I never thought about design or anything like that at that time. I was very much into the arts, and I won awards and all those things before that time, but I never was a designer. And redesigned it. And I looked, and all of a sudden the table starts shaking, and they hover, and they smack into each other and form this one long table, right? And as soon as it drops, these doors open up, these people come running in, setting the table, bringing all this food, setting this long, long, long table. And then as soon as they were done, this other group of people started coming in, and there were kings and poor people and like all kinds of people from different socio-economic backgrounds, races, and they sat and they dined together, right?
Yeah.
And so that was like, for me, around 15 was my, call it Jesus experience or whatever, right? But about, I don't know, it was also the first time I could dream in color and control it. So that was huge. So the next night, I had this dream, this recurring dream, where I would walk down this dark alley, and these guys would jump out of these trash cans and just beat me, just beat me. And I would finally, like, with very little life, make it to the end of the alley. And then I came into this place, and there's this big spider web, and this big woman spider would come down and just kill me. And then I'd wake up. And I had this dream over and over and over again. But this time, I was like, wait, this is that dream, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I did it, but I was in control. And I knew, like, when the people would jump out of the trash cans, and, like, my arm would turn into a machine gun. I remember, I'm a 15-year-old boy, right? So I'm like, I'm walking down, and nothing touched me, right? I destroyed it all. And then when I got to the end, the Spider Woman came down, and I just got down on one knee, and these big missiles came out of my back and just blew it up. And I woke up, and I was flooded for 3 days with intense anger, just intense anger towards my mom. Because I'm Puerto Rican. So when I was raised in Puerto Rican culture, it didn't matter if your mom came and cut you in the eyeballs, you still loved her, right? Like you don't ever not like your mom.
Mm-hmm.
But here was this something broke where I could be honest and disgusted at the evil. Mm-hmm. And for 3 days, I was just in this intense anger and grief. And then it hit me, and I had pity. And from the pity came love, right?
Yes.
And so it was about 15, and I ultimately came to this place where I loved my mom truly, because I could hate her truly. And when she died about 3 years later, about maybe a month before she died, she said, "Out of all my children, you're the only one who's ever loved me." And to this day, none of my siblings talk good or even love my mom. Like they despise her. I have one brother who loves her so much that he doesn't love her. He loves this fake imagination of her. Right. The one who had his arm broken. When he tells the story, my mom came home and she had 3 bags of groceries, and the groceries were falling out. Yeah, like what you talking about, man? She had drugs in those bags. Remember that was the day she broke your arm, right? Like, no, it was my fault. I should have, And so
you're breaking my heart.
Well, don't. This is a great story.
It's a great story,
right?
You're the only one free of your siblings.
Well, yeah. Because it only comes through the power of Christ that you can forgive at that level. Now, ultimately, last week I wept for my mom. She's been dead for over 20 years because I got deep insight into what made her wicked, right?
Right.
And And so, when she was 12 years old, she had this little dog, and they were living in Puerto Rico. And at that time, her father worked in the sugar cane. And so there was a fire that got started. And so everybody ran out of the house, but her dog was still in the house. And so he ran back into the house to get the dog, and neither of them came out. And and to be 12-year-old little girl, little boy, little kid, and to have that guilt and that shame.
Yes.
And then to have your own mother basically for the rest of your life blame you. And so, within that year, the mother was so disgusted at my mom. I guess my grandmother was so disgusted at my mom that she sent her away to a boarding school, which is where she discovered drugs and was hooked for the rest of her life, And, and so you realize, like, she carried what demon was on that poor woman that she ultimately had to kill the father of her own children, just like somebody, like she had that, I killed my dad, I'm going to kill another dad, in that sense. Right.
Right.
And then you realize it's not her, right?
No.
It's a story that, just like when I was looking at myself, well, you're not disciplined, right? You're not worthy of being one called disciplined, right? It's like, so there's these stories that we still hold on to. And I'm sharing my story to give you faith that he's 93, but dang, anything can happen.
I'm hearing you, because I know we don't have time to go into this now, but I had shivers up my spine several times talking, because Spider Woman used to visit me.
Really?
Yes. I would dream about her regularly. Yes. And always a very negative force that I couldn't understand what that was about. So we have to talk about this later. Second thing, I'm a preemie too. I was born early because of something my father did. We have to talk. We have to talk later.
Right.
We have a lot in common. A lot.
That's pretty incredible.
Your dreams are incredible. No wonder. So you try to do lucid dreaming, do you? Or you do it?
I would do lucid drawing. No. Well, yeah. I went through a time where that, like, if I need a solution to something, I go to bed. Right.
Wow.
It's like, because then I wake up and it's like right in that part where you're not fully conscious, but you're coming into consciousness. All of a sudden, like, you're hypersensitive and answers just flood right in, And interestingly enough, I used to always think this was a very spiritual thing. And so I always found it cool. And I used to find it very cool that I never needed drugs to tap into these levels. And I used to take great pride in that. And then I realized I was listening to a scientist who was talking about creativity, and they're like, this is what happens in the brain. It also happens a lot in alcohol fetal syndrome children, where they just have this ability to be hyper creative, right? Because of the chemicals that they're bathed in. It stimulates their brain in a way and unlocks these things. And I'm like, but then there's also things I struggle with, right? My friend used to say, I don't get how you get these huge, like, cosmic concepts and you don't even make your bed in the morning. Like, which I do now based on how he taught me, but it took me 15 years to come to develop that discipline. But and he's like, I don't get it, man. Like, you have a hard time with, like, basic things, but then you're like on this other level that
Yes, I totally understand you. I absolutely do. Look, when your brain is taken up with the kinds of things that yours is taken up with, making your bed does not occur to you as being anything of importance whatsoever. But I would also agree with you that learning to do it is very beneficial.
Yeah. It's like, before I leave my house in the morning, I'm like, come on, it's just one act. Someone once told me, if you say to yourself, it'll only take a minute, it usually only takes a minute.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm like, come on, this is going to take me 30 seconds to, throw my sheets on right. Now I'm not a woman. I might sound sexist saying this. It just seems like for some reason women know how to make a bed. They tuck things in. It takes 15 minutes to do it. I don't get it. I don't know why we just don't throw a sheet on it. But so, I'm a single guy. So my bed looks like a single guy made it. Right. But I made it, and that's the point, right? and when I come home, people used to say, "Man, there's nothing better to slip into a nice, fresh, like a bed that's made." Yes. And I didn't get that, but now I get it. Like I'm like, when I say now, I mean over the last couple of years. Like but still, like I've been doing it for years now. But it's still every night I'm like, "Whoa, this feels good,"
Yes. Yes. Do you know who Jordan Peterson is by any chance?
Absolutely.
Okay. You know how he talks about me. People that are just overwhelmed by life, the first thing you do to start to get control of your life is make your bed.
That's probably where the extra oomph to do it came from. Yeah, Mr. Jordan.
Yeah. Oh, that's so
awesome.
Cool.
So let's talk a little bit more about your art, okay?
Okay.
So you've only been doing it for 18 months, which is insane because you guys have to go check out the artwork because it's good.
Oh, thank you.
And I love the terroir that it's built in, right? I mean, you can sense some of that Western energy coming through, which is beautiful because that's where you're from, but it's also your father's spirit, right?
Yeah.
And that's a gorgeous thing. I love the intimacy of it. I don't think you have a picture where somebody's far away observing. It's like you're right up into everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's how I experience life, is right in smack in the face of it, for better or worse. And I imagine you do as well.
Well, actually, I showed my foster mom this picture of where I wanted 3 kids. It was long before I had kids. This is what my wife's look like. I drew this picture of us, her and I, having wine in this beautiful place. And down there was a dog with the 3 kids, and in the clouds there were people, and I showed my mom, and she starts crying. And I'm like, "Isn't that good?" Right? And I say my mom, I mean my foster mom, and she's like, "No." I'm like, "What are you talking about? What?" Right? And she's like, "You're just observing. Look at your kids down there painting by themselves, and you're up here watching them." You're just. I'm
sorry.
Yeah.
Let me turn that off. Hold on. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
She said, "You're just watching them. You're observing them." Right. And that broke her heart because I wasn't participating. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't involved. And, and for years I felt I felt shame about that until I realized, no, like that's just my gift. With every gift comes a curse. Right? If you're so close, you don't see everything. Mm-hmm. But if you're so far away, you're not close. But that's just the give and take, And so some people will paint close, some people will paint far, and so a lot of my pictures are, even if you are close up in the crowd, the picture's not about the crowd per se. It's about what the crowd is observing in a distance, right?
Okay, I have to see your art now. So, yes, that is very much true. I think that there's gifts and there's drawbacks for both being an observer and too involved, very involved in life.
Van Gogh said it this way. He said, "You can't be on the North Pole and the equator at the same time, so pick a line." He said, "My line is color."
And boy, did he know what to do with that.
Right.
However, I'm always startled reading his letters, how he describes paintings when I'm looking at them. Unless they're a really bad reproduction in the book, where does he come up with the way he describes what I'm looking at? Because the color that he describes and the color that I'm seeing don't match up often. Do you ever have that experience?
No. Although I would like that experience. I haven't read his letters and looked at his artwork at the same time, except for once. And that was, and I did a video on it where I was looking at the Starry Night, breaking it down into the grids that he would use to compose. And that was a very fascinating decoding of that painting. But
did he compose with grids? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he wrote about it. Like he said, there's this place where you can see it in two places, where he had this viewfinder that he bought, and he's like, it was really good, but the problem was that it just had horizontal and vertical line, and so I had this guy modify it to have diagonals put in there, and so he drew a picture of it. And then some of the other drawings, you can actually see the grid underneath the image and how he aligned even just like grasses, like his grass and things like that up on it. It was cool. It was cool.
I'm just so surprised. I would never have known that had you not told me. Because his paintings, unless you're seeing the grid underneath, or maybe you have an eye more trained for that, I would think he did everything freehand. They have that feeling to me.
Well, the movement and the brush has a freedom to it, but the composition, I'm going to put it out there that you won't find a master who did not take the time to compose properly.
Absolutely agree.
Okay. So like that Starry Night, you see all these stars in the sky and they're swirling and moving and so much life in the picture. And yet if you know how to find what we call the armature, the grid that's underneath it, every single star, the center of it is plotted on the grid, right? The core of every star and moon and sun and whatever. And you're like, what? This is insane. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
So that's why I love like a painter like him, where he has this ability to see into past nature, right? Because what he's really looking at is the energy that's moving through all things, the spirit, right?
Right.
And all a spirit is the thing that animates a feeling, thought, or idea. So if you look at the sky, you feel it's moving. Well, it's not. Yeah. I mean, it is, but you're not technically seeing it moving unless you see a cloud, right? But then he paints it that way. He's painting the movement of trees and grass and the whole thing. It's this energy that moves through the entire thing, right? And he's really painting the evidence of this invisible life force, right? That's in all things.
Yes.
But then to do that, so he keeps that style that he's created. He has that freedom of the brushstroke, but to have that level of freedom, he has to have boundaries, and so you take the time to compose that thing out, and then you can paint free on top of it.
I could not agree more, Don, that people, especially people that I've sometimes seen try abstract art without first understanding what good design and composition is, and they don't understand why it isn't working. That's why I would agree with you completely. You can't, you're not allowed the freedom to do that until you understand where that comes from and build on that. And then you can let go, you know?
It's a rule in parenting. You know, if you just say to your kids, go out and play, they can't be free because they don't know. And if you say, go out and play, but if you go too far, you're going to be in trouble, right? Well, if they don't know what the boundaries are, then they can never play freely because they don't ever know if they've gone too far. Yes. And so what happens is you don't want to break a boundary. And so you assume a boundary and then you come in a little bit so that you don't break it. But the problem is the one that you assumed might be 20 feet away from where the boundary should be. Right. Yes. So you're playing inside this little space when you're permitted legally to play in a much bigger space.
Yes.
Right. And so we have to be able to speak the boundaries, like, so when I go out with my kids, I was, just even something like I went to the auto zone. I had to replace something in the car. It was a spark plug or whatever it was. And so I popped the hood, but I told, and my kids were with me, and I wasn't going to have them sit in a car. So the first thing I do is like, you see that garbage can? You see that red pole? That brick? Like these are the boundaries. Have fun. You go past it, you sit in the seat, right? Like it's
right.
And they won't go past it. Right.
Good. Yeah. And they're secure.
And they're secure because they know. Yeah. And then they have fun, But it's funny because it's a principle, but you bring it back to your artwork, right? And
yes, but what about the happy accidents that shouldn't work and do? What about those?
Oh, that's simple. They're beautiful, happy accidents, but we don't want to build. See, I think it's in 1 Timothy, right, where Paul says, "Hey, you can be a wooden spoon, you can be a brass spoon, you can be a silver spoon, or you can be a gold spoon. The gold spoon you don't take out for everybody who comes, right? The kings show up, you bring the gold spoon out, right? The wooden spoon you do for everybody. So every once in a while, you have a happy accident. Oh my gosh, I tapped into something that's very close to being a gold spoon.
Yeah.
But that's not authority. That's a happy accident. You want to be able to consistently produce gold spoons on demand.
It's difficult. Maybe because I'm such a new painter, but I find it difficult to reproduce my happy accidents.
Spend time with them. Talk to them.
Or maybe I just need to understand why they're working. I don't know.
That's a big thing.
But I almost don't want to go there because so much of what I do as in any way that's creative, whether it's writing or painting or designing, is intuitive. And if you were to ask me to explain why I'm doing it this way instead of that way, I could not tell you. I just know it has to be this way.
Sure.
So,
but the fact that it has to be that way means that there's a reason for it. And for us as believers, right? Let me lay it out this way for you. I'm going to give you two perspectives to it, okay?
Okay.
Which sounds like I'm certain you're not an evolutionist. You're much more of a intelligent designist. Would you agree to that?
Yes.
God created the universe with intention, deliberately, and intelligently, right? Yeah. Or was it just a happy accident that kind of evolved itself into something amazing? Okay.
Not possible.
So we can say a huge decline in art happened around 100 years ago. You read the writings that were going on, people are like, industrial age is coming into effect. So we're having to mass produce things. So craftsmanship isn't as important. People are moving into cities. They're coming out away from nature. They're losing that connection to the divine. They're being removed off farms and put into universities so that they're being told what to think. And a lot of it is no. And during that time also was a huge push of this idea of the evolutionist theory, right? So when I look at artists talking, you will, especially nowadays, because artists back in the old days, they didn't talk about happy accidents and being intuitive. They fought, literally. They were competitive about, and if you have this conversation with your dad, you'll probably hit some at 93 years old, you're going to hit some interesting places. But being deliberate about what you do versus frolicking in this field, right? And there is a place for that. There's if you can't frolic before you create, in Genesis 1, it says that the spirit brooded over the dead, right? There's that place where it's like there is no definition, right? You're just searching. You're searching. And so there has to be a place in creativity that you do that. But I'd have you go read Exodus 31.
Let me write that down.
And what you'll find in there is that throughout the whole Old Testament, there are only 2 times, at least to my knowledge, that it says that the Spirit of God filled something. Right. Outside of like the temple, but like when it came to humans, it filled Adam and it filled these other people. From my understanding, every other time it just came upon something. It influenced them, but it did not enthusios God within. It did not fill them. And in Exodus 31, he says to Moses, go, we want to build a temple, go to this tribe, find this guy, also find other men and women like this, men and women, that they would have a wise heart. And those people, I will fill them with my Spirit, and out of them will come design, artisanship, all kinds of things that you need.
I know the passage. Yes.
Yeah. So
gold, weavings, the people that do all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so all of that stuff, none of that stuff is done freely, right?
Right.
It is a wise heart. It's not a free heart.
Right.
It's not a do whatever you want. Now, there has to be the heart. There has to be a sensitivity to things, but it's wise. So you know how to put it into action,
Yes.
And so it requires knowledge, passion, and then the merging of the two, which is what comes out of a wise-hearted person. And so, yeah.
That's exactly what my father would say. He would say that it's all the years of study and training that enables him to have that occasional painting that he's done that is just out of this world. And he'll even say, I've done maybe 5 really great paintings in my whole life, and he's painted for 50 years.
Picasso would say that too.
Really?
Like his goal was he had warehouses full of paintings, but every year he would do at least one great one, so that they would say that. So when he died and he went to hell, because all artists go to hell in this story. And my this is what my art master used to say. He's like, there's this place in hell just for artists. And so, and it's like a saloon, it's like a bar, and there's a special table, where you would see the greats. And
the what?
And the great artists.
Oh, the greats. Yes. Uh-huh.
And so Picasso wants to sit at that table. And so he would pay his due and every year design, compose a masterwork, but for the rest of the year, he was just popping out stuff.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that we are in control when we do the great ones. I don't think that's us at all. I think we've put the time in, working hard, studying, learning, doing very bad paintings and studying why they're bad. And then suddenly that's enough to get us out of the way that God comes through for the great ones.
I don't smile at you and totally disagree.
Okay, you're allowed.
I've just seen it over and over and over and over again. Success. I love it when somebody says, this is what the Spirit is telling me that I need to communicate. And then there's a system you can go through so that you communicate that and it follows all the way through. And then when people who don't know the process see the artwork, they're like, oh my God, for some reason, this is what it makes me feel. And you're almost word for word. Like when I coach people, I have them go through a thing that we call story, and they write it out exactly what it is that they want people to feel or experience. And it shocks them that when people come, they're like, wow, this is what I feel. And a lot of times it's within 80%, if not 100% of what was spoken before one line was drawn. And
is that how you paint? Do you decide this is what I want people to feel and then try to paint that?
Yeah, because that's the prayer. I'm not praying it out. Think about it like this. Jesus spent hours before people woke up in prayer, right?
Right.
So before anyone woke up, he was out there already hours in prayer. And then when you look at what he did during the day, everything was immediate. There was one place where he says he got in the boat and immediately they were on the other side of the river, right? People were immediately healed, like these things, right?
Right.
So in his daily walk, boom, 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 it happened immediately. But what didn't happen immediately was the hours of prayer that he put in before people were up, right?
Right.
So what happens is most painters work this way nowadays. Oh, I get this great idea. And they start sketching it out on the canvas. And then they go into the painting and they bypass the design and the composition part of it, which is really spending that time knowing what it is that the spirit is telling you to articulate. And design is actually how you articulate it. Composition is how you infuse the math into it. Because without the math, it feels off. It doesn't feel right. And then you execute it, right? So it's like, oh, I want a really nice house, and then you go hire a contractor to start building the house. Like, no, wait. You need an architect. The architect's going to ask you the right questions so that everything you want is in there and it all works together properly. Once you have that plan, then you hand it off to the contractor, aka the painter. Go perform this.
Don, have you ever done all that and had it not come out well?
The fact that I have to pause and think about, I'm trying to find an example where it did not come out well. I've analyzed hundreds of, if not nearly 1,000 paintings, and it's the same stuff over and over and over again. I've worked with many artists, same experience. It's like the intimacy that they have with their artwork is at such a deep level because, see, what happens is you have all these things that you're managing, right? You have to manage values, you have to manage edges and lines, you have to manage spacing, all these things.
Problems.
And well, let's just call them each we call them layers, okay? And so each of these layers have their own voice. And so your values might be speaking one story, your line speaking a different story, the spacing speaking a different story, right? And so what happens is, and this is why it's hard for me to walk in contemporary galleries, even the people who are doing photolistic work. It's hard for me to walk in because I'm so sensitive to it that all I hear are schizophrenic bodies. Like one painting is a body, but there's 15 voices coming out of it.
Wow.
Right? So you need to know what is the voice that is speaking clearly to you that says, I need this to be spoken visually. You spend time in that thing. People aren't spending enough time. Kenyon Cox wrote in his book called The Classic Spirit. People are not spending enough time in nature anymore, and therefore the work is failing, right? The artwork is failing.
I believe that.
You got to spend time in there. That's the prayer. You got to hear. If you're not connecting to the source, right? So you spend time in it. Understand what is the message. Then spend time gathering that information, logically putting it together in a way that when someone stands in front of it, it imparts to them, it broadcasts to them, so that when they look at the values, they look at the lines, they feel the spacing, the colors, the size, where you place your signature, all of these elements, they all speak, vibrate at the same frequency. They all say the same message. And you stand in front of it and you feel whole. You feel at peace.
Yes, right? I understand. Yes. Maybe it's because I'm such a new artist that if I managed to do paintings like that it's completely accidental or so intuitive that I don't even know what I'm doing.
And sadly, you're only 18 months in, but artists who are 18 years in have the same problem. I mean, they could be 81 years old, still suffering from the same issue. You know,
I don't want that to happen.
You know, and it doesn't take long. It's like I mean, you got to, honestly, if you want to be serious about it, you got to invest 5, 6, 7 years of being in that knowledge base, right? Until it becomes so second nature to you. But,
I believe you.
But I'm at it for close to 25 years now. I was about 17 when I first got introduced to classic design, classic composition. Sadly, I was already winning awards before then because I had natural skill and talent and was a good storyteller. But to elevate it to a museum quality nature, something that could, sustain through time.
Yes.
And then you go back 5,000, 6,000 years, 7,000 years, go back long time. And you look at the artwork that was being produced then, and you're like, the precision, the math, the design, the storytelling. And it doesn't matter what country you're in, what epoch you're in, it comes down to two things: communication, aka your story, purpose of it, the feeling that you want to convey, the idea that you want to convey, and then design. If you're not designing it, you're not communicating it. And what's beautiful about design, it's not a man-made language. It exists. It's God created. We've just discovered the language. We didn't invent design.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. But both of those things for me are not things I've ever thought about, because as a graphic designer for 25 years, it just translates to my paintings to some degree.
Sure.
And as far as storytelling, I'm a writer,
Sure. And that's why you're brilliant. That's why your artwork's awesome.
That's why. Well, thank you. I'm very conscious.
It's not divine yet. It's just awesome.
Right. No, I'm conscious of how amateurish it looks. It's very. I know
it doesn't look amateur. It's not these lies.
It does, Don. It does. Even no. Even I'm not being humble. I even know that. I'll paint it and I'll go back and look at it, and I'm just like, oh no.
So let me ask you this question, because I love that you're so humble about it. People would look at it and say,
I'm just telling you the truth. I
said that with sarcasm. So, so
okay.
Most people would look at it and say, "Oh my gosh, that's incredible!" Right? There are so many things in it that I absolutely love. Now, you're talking about a standard, which I love that you I remember when I was young, I would look at my work and I get frustrated with it, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's so great." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it ain't professional, right? It ain't." And I'm like 16. What do I care about being professional? But that's what I used to say, right?
Yes.
It's not right. There's a standard out there, and it's subpar. So I get where your frustration is, where your honesty is coming from. So the question I have for you is, what do you need in your work for it to start to come into that right frequency?
I know exactly what that is, and that is more drawing. I don't draw enough. That's
funny.
No, I'm serious. I don't.
No, I agree.
Okay.
Michelangelo said that drawing, he called it line drawing, right? He said the science of design, or line drawing, is the very essence of sculpture, painting, and architecture. So you're saying it. You need to go study true classic design, which is drawing.
I've never had any art education whatsoever as far as how to do art. I have a minor in art history, which turned out not to be at all what I thought it was very disappointing. But as far as any kind of studio time or learning techniques, nothing whatsoever. And I think that shows in my work. And I think it's just a matter of time and experience. It will get better as I continue to paint. I'm sure.
Well, there's good news. The other day I was praying, and there's only one thing I fear in life: standing before God and Him saying, "Why didn't you care for all those that I sent to you?" Right? It's the only thing I fear. And for me specifically, is He's given me this specific knowledge in design and composition.
Yes.
And so I was praying the other day, and I was like, for years I created this brilliant course that anyone who goes through, it changes the way that they see art. It connects them back to the old masters. They always say it's almost like I can hear them speaking in my head, right? There's this connection that occurs. And problem is like I used to always try to sell it, right? And so the other day was like,
no,
are you selling it? Or, and I thought I saw a picture of me laying there dead and saying, yeah, I sold 100 courses. When I had the ability to change the lives of 1 million people, right? And so I was like, all right, I'll in faith step out. It's extremely valuable, but I'm giving it away for free now. So if you're listening to this podcast, if you go to academyofcomposition.com, click on the course that says right now at this time, it says the classic art mystery revealed. Click on that. And when you go to purchase it, type in the word Don Victor, no space, Don Victor, and you'll get it absolutely free. And there's probably, 30 some hours of videos in there. But the way you go through it, there's 15 lessons. You're going to do 7 analysis. By the time you go through this, you should be able to do it in about 2 weeks. If not, if you want to go 2 times a week, it'll take you 30 days to go through it. You will analyze over 100 paintings in less than a month, where most artists will never really truly analyze one. But in a month, you will have analyzed at a deep level nearly 100 paintings. And when you go into each lesson, there's a short video, 5 to 20 minutes roughly, that teaches you the principle. But there is a longer video, and I suggest that you watch that video at least one time. You get the whole class, and the students that went through it the first time, they had questions and issues, and we solved those. So it's really good to go through it one time. You don't have to, but it's wise if you do. I've used to have people go and search for artwork. Now I've actually provided 7 images that you can just download right there. The only thing I ask you to do, if you're going to go in there and get that thing for free, is when you do the work, post it on your Facebook so that other people, or your social media, so that other people can come and get access to it. And just tell them how to get it for free, so that we can get this visual literacy, or what I'm calling visual intelligence, out. Because the problem with art today, it's like, well, you know what it's like?
What?
Not teaching kids cursive anymore, right?
Yes.
So when they see cursive, they can look at it and say, oh, wow, that's pretty. That's cool. But they can't read it. And therefore, they'll never receive the power of the message that was given, because all they're looking at is the cosmetic neatness of it. And that's how people walk into a museum. They're like, oh, that's a cool painting. That's pretty. And in 5 minutes, they walk past 60 paintings because they're pretty. They don't know how to read it. You need to stand 20, 40 minutes in front of one painting. And it comes alive when you know the language. And I'm not talking about vocabulary. I mean, the design language, the visual language. It's incredible.
The more you know. Yes, that's what I was describing when I said, when people say, I know what I like, I always think, oh, but you don't. Just study it and immerse yourself, and then you really, really will. You'll understand why. And I got to tell you, Don, that you are never going to hear that from Jesus when you stand in front of him, because you, more than any person I've ever spoken to, have the spirit of a servant, more like Jesus than anybody. You are very, very giving of yourself. You will not hear that from him. There's no possible way.
I don't know if you ever experienced this. I'll ask you if you've ever prayed in tongues before.
No, I haven't.
Or if you've, okay.
I've
It's
heard
this
of it,
thing
yes.
that, I've been doing it since about 15. And it's probably, in all honesty, even more important to me than my children. My children come second to it. That's how, that's where my faith is born in, is in that practice. And the other day I got this crazy idea. I was praying in tongues and I kept repeating this sentence in this weird, jumbly baby language.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, wait, we have Google Translate. And so I typed it in to Google Translate where it detects the language, and it came back as Arabic. And what it spoke back to me was how to walk generously.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And it's kind of creepy when I do it lately, like with the Google Translate. I'll like say a sentence. I'll be like, right? And it will come back and it will say, call me Father Bashadin Liberato, which happens to be my great-grandfather's name, you know, and as if they can. It's creepy. It's cool. But, and I'm like, okay. But the other day, when the first time I ever did that, it came out as how to walk. And I realized that how to walk is the core to our faith. We always say how to walk, but in the Paleo Hebrew, that old Hebrew language, they would never say something. They never had abstract ideas, right? So the idea where we would go out and we would say, oh, it's a beautiful day, right? Well, beautiful is abstract. How do you can't comprehend it, right? So they would say, oh, the day is as if the sun is warming my face.
Right.
You feel that. It's action. It's concrete. And so the language was like that. And so the idea of what we would call religion or faith was always this idea of walking. That's why he says that God would come and walk with Adam. So we always think, oh, they were skipping and holding hands in the beginning. Like, no, that means he was actually living the faith, whatever that faith was. And so the faith here is how to walk. That's really what it is, how to walk. And then what is the faith? Generosity, right? You're walking out that part of the kingdom or that part of the nature of God. And, you know, it's, and so I embraced that, because if it wasn't for the generosity of other people throughout my life, I'd be dead, literally, you know? And so it's a big part of my heart.
You are so connected. You really, really are. And I'm so glad you said that your tongues actually were another language and meant something, because my understanding of it in the Bible was that's what it was. It was not just nonsense words. It was actually other languages that people didn't know how to speak, and suddenly were able to.
It's both.
Really?
And yeah, so one you speak. So like the other day at church, I was praying in tongues, kind of to myself, but loud enough. And the guy next to me was like, yo, you're just speaking in Spanish. And I don't speak Spanish. Right. And I'm like, what? And the Ukrainian people were there, and they're like, oh my gosh, you just said something that my grandmother would say. Right. Now, grandmother meaning old Ukrainian. Right. And they were saying like, you just spoke like old Ukrainian. Right. So there is, when you speak where things get translated, people hear what they hear. But when I was in college, I had this beautiful roommate from Nigeria. And he taught me, in my opinion, the most powerful spiritual concept that I've ever learned. And he said, what happens is you pray in tongues because it's a vibration. Because if you try to pray, it says pray in knowledge, right? So that doesn't mean like, oh, I know you're sick, so I'm going to pray for you're sick, right? Because you're thinking in English. And English is ultimately a very weak language. So when you pray in tongues, what you're actually doing is getting into your getting the vibration the spirit is asking you to be in. So let me give you an example. I was going to work. Well, I was going to a job interview. And so I'm driving there, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get there. I'm going to sell them, right? Like, this is my mind, right? I'm going to get this job, I'm going to press them, whatever it is, right? And which is good. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I thought, well, maybe I should pray and see what God wants, right? And so I'm praying, and because I've been doing it for so many years, there's a repeated words that I know when I hear, I know what my spirit is saying. Right?
Okay.
So if I say like Allah salam, I know that means bring peace. So salam is in there, right? Or if I say the word salaikum, right? It's a greeting. So I know. So that's what happened here, right? And so I'm praying. I'm like, salaikum. I'm like, what? That's weird. Why am I being told greet? This is a greeting. And as I said, very different frequency than I'm here to sell, right?
Yeah.
So I said, okay, let me put the I'm here to sell myself to the side. And all I'm going to do is go and meet and greet these people. That's the intention. Very different vibration, very different intention. And I was deliberate about, I'm just here to meet and greet. I got the job, right?
Great.
So, but this is the cool part. I'm sitting in my little cubicle as a graphic designer of this place, right next to the salespeople. The big area where all these salespeople are in, and they're making these sales calls every day. Da-da-da. And then I'm listening one day, and I pick up on it, and I realize their philosophy. They never close on the first phone call. The first phone call, and it's part of the culture of that business for 40 years. You greet the first time you meet. You don't sell. And so therefore, I got the job because they saw themselves in me.
Wow.
If I came to sell, I wouldn't have fitted in the culture. Right. And so that's like one of those little practical stories. And so that was, I think, the most, so anything I do before I get on one of these calls, just take a moment and get into the right vibration. Cause I'll think okay, I guess I should be doing this or doing that. And it sounds rational, it sounds good, logical, but then I pray and it's a whole different vibration. And then all of a sudden, like, things happen.
Yes, you're listening to the Holy Spirit. I need to ask you, is what you call the muse the Holy Spirit, an aspect of the Holy Spirit?
The answer to that question is yes and no. Okay. I believe there are many, many spirits. Okay. Clean spirits, unclean spirits, whatever. If you ask for the Holy Spirit will speak with you. Right. But there are spirits, and so whichever one it is that you're tapping into, it wants to speak, right? It wants to manifest. It's looking for a body. Why do you think we call it a body of work, right? The word museum means a shrine to the muses, right? So it's just not a place we put old artifacts. We put art in there, things that were inspired by people who were communing with the muse. So for me, yes, I personally evoke, commune with a spirit named Holy. It's also the spirit of wisdom. One would call her Sophia, right? As they say in the scriptures, or Chakma, right? I think is the Hebrew for it. And she was there in the beginning, that spirit, right? And now I know that sounds a little weird, but if you go back, you talk to any Arab, Hebrew person, or Jew, look in the old scripture. It's always, the Holy Spirit's always spoken in a female tense.
I've heard both. I don't really know, but I'm open to it.
What happens is that when it got translated into the Greek, it was neutered, right? Because in the Hebrew and in the Arabic, there is no neutered sex. It's only male, female. Everything's either male, female. The Greeks introduced the neutered concept, this it. Then when you translated that into English, they applied he to it, right? So But when you look at the nature of it, it's a comforter, it's a helper, all these, it's a very feminine energy. So the point being is, for me, yes, I invite the Holy Spirit into that conversation. For other people, I don't know what that's like, what that is, what they're tapping into. There are some people who've come to me and said, I want to paint this, and I'm sorry, I can't help you with it because it's not, there's an impurity in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, I deal with a couple Catholics, and at times we've had to have serious conversations. I cannot help you compose that painting because I'm not going to help you create an image that people are going to come by and worship Mary from it. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, yes, we can have Mary there, but if we're going to design it, Mary then is leading somebody to this place of peace.
Yes.
They're not worshiping Mary. Mary's not giving them the peace. They ultimately, in the composition, come to this place which gives them peace, but it's not on Mary, right? So, right. And that's how we find these compromises, which works. Yeah. But there are certain times where it's like, it's happened a couple of times where I'm like, we really need to sit down and talk about what is the message that you're trying to do.
And do you get pushback when you do that from them?
The first time. And then I'll say, because I'm thinking of two examples with the same person, and we've worked together for, 3-4 years now. Mm-hmm. The relationship I actually have with her is she's a commissioned artist. And because she wants this standard in her work and this soul in her work, mm-hmm, our relationship is I get paid 20% of her commissions. And so I design it. She goes, meets the client. She brings the information back. She says, oh, yeah, this is what I'm thinking. I'm like, no, that's not why they hired you. This is why. And then the clients are always happy because they're like, oh, my gosh, how did you know? Right. and so we just have this relationship where she just knows. Right. And she trusts me. And we nail it every single time, consistently. Oh, wow. Bam, bam, bam. I have another client I deal with, 100% success rate. If she's entering a competition, I advise her on it. She wins. She either wins, she sells, or both with the same image. There was a time where she went to this show and she did this painting she was so proud of. She sent it to me. I'm like, wow, let's. She made the changes, put it in a show. Which one sold that night? That's the one great. I advised her on it, right? And it is sold great. Like before the show started. They're like, I gotta have that one, So,
but hopefully, you're teaching them what it is you're doing, so that they can.
Absolutely,
to
absolutely.
do that.
That's the goal. It's not with Donna. It's beautiful because at some point she's learning, and it's beautiful to have the conversations, and she's seeing it. But she, from the beginning, our first conversation said, I need to be with you for 5 years. She's the only person who's ever said that. And she's the one who receives the greatest amount of success from us. And so we have these great conversations. I'm so proud of her because she's, she's being baptized in this knowledge that she now, my goal is I don't want her to have me, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I want her to be able to stand on her own and be able to hear and compose and produce. But for right now, this is our relationship and it works out really well. And she tells her clients up front, hey, I'm working with, she calls me her John Lennon and she's the Paul McCartney. and that's all kind of stemmed from when I was in college. I had a professor, Don Rogers, who once said, I love finishing work and I love being in the process. What I can't stand is coming up with the ideas and authoring the piece, right? How to start it.
Gosh, that's the fun part.
Well, exactly. For you and I, that's our power, right? But for him, and there's so many artists who struggle at that. They struggle at that. And that's not a bad thing. I think what's happened is years and years ago, Da Vinci said it. He said, the job of the master is to conceive, the idea and design it. The actual execution is for the, for the workers.
Mm-hmm.
So now fast forward a couple hundred years, now we have this idea where you're a solo artist and you have to do it all,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're not trained to do it all. You might be trained to get great conceptual ideas, but no one's teaching you to design. No one's teaching you how to run a business, right?
Yes.
So in college, you pay them $500,000 and they teach you, well, basically nothing. But if they did teach you something, it's primarily get really neat ideas and then go painting, right? They never give you a business class, how to actually run your business. And there's almost never a true design composition class for artists. It's always like a 2D project, 3D projects,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not done in a way that actually translates to making paintings. And
absolutely true. I think that's true. And you see that missing in so many paintings that have other beautiful qualities, great brush work,
absolutely,
great color, but the designs, and I honestly think you cannot have a good painting without good composition and design.
You can't.
But so many people don't know that simple thing. Why?
Well, people don't know. Yeah, they eat and they put 10, scoopings of salt on their food and they call it good. They got to have everything either has to be sugar or butter or salty. They have no idea that there's all these other kinds of experiences out there. And then, when they have health problems and they don't understand. It's the same thing with their art. It's like, okay, you're playing with color. That's like butter. Yummy. But if you can't control it, then too much butter is gross and it's not good for you.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So where's this beautiful balance and how do you bring it together? Now, if you notice, I'm talking about food because we got to get there.
I know this is going on a long time, but I'm really enjoying it so much. I have to ask you really, really quickly.
Yes.
Have you had the experience of looking at a painting and having a dark feeling? And I wonder if that's from what you were talking about is maybe a muse that's not really so.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Because I have, and I thought, am I just crazy? Or is this just dark?
What happens is this. You ever try to paint and put two different kinds of music on? Right. So this is why when I go in the studio and I paint, I always put love music on, right? Ballads.
Nice.
Because I want to be in that vibration. So this is what it means to be inspired, right? To be in spirit, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
I say, okay, what spirit do I want to be in? And all a spirit is from my understanding, I don't know the physiology of the spirit realm. I'm not even going there. In my mind, there is no physiology to it. It's just energy. But I say, okay, well, what spirit do I want to be in? What is that thing that animates feelings, ideas, and thoughts? Right? Okay. Right. I want people to love the work. So I want to be in an atmosphere of love. Right? So I want peace. So before I create things, I clean my house. I go do my dishes. Right?
Yes.
Having that order brings peace, and therefore I can sit in peace. I'm sitting in the spirit of peace. Therefore, I can exude that out. But when I was studying, people would put on their headphones and I'm like, how can you create anything beautiful when you have that racket going on in your skull, right?
Exactly.
How can you hear anything? And
I've seen their paintings.
So what happens is the motion that they're making, if their body is in tune with that sound, right? Yeah. The pulse is coming through them. Their brush strokes are making that rhythm.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. So you need to know. So there's two aspects of it, right? There's being in a spirit or the spirit, whatever spirit you choose to be in. And there's also being enthusiastic about something. So enthusiasm meaning in, like God within, right?
Right.
So this is where someone who practices a certain kind of prayer ritual, we'll call it, where they get themselves in tune. So, and there's a lot of ways to do that. So if you ever notice, a lot of people, they always say that they feel very close to God in the shower, right? And there's reasons for it, or while they're doing dishes. It's like they can't turn off the creativity.
Huh.
And what happens is, on a scientific level, once you get yourself into a low motor routine that requires just enough energy to do the motion, but not enough energy to actually think about the motion, such as washing yourself, because you've done it so many times you don't even think about it.
Right.
So when you're in that state where the brain has this repetitive motion going on, all of a sudden it unlocks things in the mind and you just get flooded with creativity, right?
Interesting.
So this to me is like when you're praying in tongues, right? Or maybe going for a nice walk on the same path that you normally do, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, so whatever that exercise is, but this is how you get in tuned. And so now that spirit, you're not in that spirit, that spirit is within you. So these are ways to have control and consistency and on-demand ability. You're not just waiting for when inspiration happens. We actually have this technology. You can,
Very helpful.
You see what I'm saying?
Very helpful. Yes, I do. Now about food. How are you connecting food to art? I can't wait to hear this.
Well, because this conversation about life and art, and I always like food. But also on my podcast page, I told a story why I started the podcast. And remember that long table and that dream that go and redesign it. And I redesigned this long table. And so the long table has always been a recurring motif in my dreams. And one of the symbols of that is that you're going to sit with family, right? And friends at this table, and you're going to eat with each other. The thing that Jesus spoke about the most, the third thing he spoke about the most was food.
Really?
Yeah. And it's interesting because when God would make covenants with people, they would have to ratify it with a covenant meal, right? So there's something very sacred about eating together. And there are things that people do today religiously that were spoken in the Bible, but never ratified with a covenant meal. And so it was never really, it's not a blessed thing, but we assume that it is. And it's very interesting, but that's more of a religious conversation. So there's something beautiful about eating together. And so this comes from a dream that I had. And so I was inspired to take the frequency of that dream and manifest it through this podcast. So here we sit together, different parts of the world, different parts of the country. We're sharing life, stories. And though we're not eating together, we can partake in the energy of that by sharing what is something that you love to eat.
I am so glad you did decide to do that. I have just had the most amazing time today. What is something I like to eat? I like tea, different kinds of teas, different flavors from different parts of the world. And I usually like it, unless it doesn't go with it, with cream and honey. And that combination of a really delicate flavor with, boom, that cream, which you'd think would ruin the delicacy. It doesn't unless you pick the wrong flavor. And the honey is just completely fulfilling to me for whatever reason. And I will never, ever, ever stop drinking tea for that reason.
I think in Japan, they call it milk tea, right?
Do they?
I think so. Where they have that tea honey combination. I believe they use the honey. Notice in the Bible, it always talks about milk and honey. Oh,
yes. Boom.
I was like, why do they always talk about that?
That's a good point. I wonder why they do. They stand for something clearly.
Yeah, it is a really nice combination. Now,
Because
I
when
drink
you're
my tea.
Go ahead.
I drink my tea only with ice, and that's it. I learned that in Portugal because before I went to Portugal, I would drink stop down at Dunkin' Donuts and get the extra large, super fat person drink of coffee with every sweetener I was allowed to put into it. Mm-hmm. And I would do that, 3 times a day. And that was 300 pounds. I always say when I went to Portugal, I only saw 3 fat people and I was 2 of them. And and so when I went to Portugal, I said, hey, I always had this philosophy: when you go to a new place, nobody knows you. It's a great opportunity to practice a new, to unfold a new dimension of yourself. And so I did 2 things. One, I stopped putting salt on food because there you never needed to put salt on anything. The food was just great. Mm-hmm. If you put salt on it, you ruined it. Mm-hmm. And now I've been back in the States for close to 3 years. Now I'm starting to put salt on things. So that tells me I need to go back out. But my coffee, I would have an espresso, and it was too strong by itself, but I didn't want to put sugar in it or milk. I wanted to keep that out. And so what I found is I used the beer rule. If you drink beer that's warm or hot, it's disgusting. But if it's cold, it's so nice. Yes. So it takes that bitterness away. And so what I do is I would put ice in my coffee, and it would, for me, it took the bitterness away. It enhanced this natural sweetness that it had. And so I do that with my coffee and my tea. I just put ice in it, and all of a sudden it's not bitter. It actually, for some weird reason, tastes sweet to me without putting anything in it.
That's great. Have you read this book called Why We Eat What We Eat?
No, but it sounds like a good one.
It's very good. It talks about there are certain kinds of people in the world called, I'll forget what they are exactly, but one is a super taster. And that's what I am. I'm a super taster, which doesn't mean that I taste things more. Well, in a way it does. I can't drink coffee. And I absolutely love the smell of it. I think it smells divine. And I can eat it in coffee ice cream. But when I try to drink actual coffee, it just is overwhelming. I'm like, no. Same for beer, same for things like that. But it's a really fascinating book because there are reasons why you pick the foods you pick. And you were made that way in the womb. Yep, by what your mother did.
Oh, how dare her. It's a neat thing. Like, for the last maybe month and a half, about a month, maybe about 4 weeks, I guess, I shifted my eating pattern. And so I've made some rules for myself. And there's 3 primary rules. One, I only eat meat on Fridays and Sundays, primarily Sundays, so that when I go with my church group and we have dinner after church, because we meet in each other's homes. So we always have we meet for about 2 hours spiritually, and then we spend about 2 hours fellowshipping with each other over dinner. So everybody brings something. So not to have any weirdness in I just say Sundays I eat whatever I want, and I'm just there to love, and that's great.
Right.
And then Fridays is kind of like I set it up as a treat for myself that on Fridays I get to eat meat, right? So the rest of the week I'll eat fish or I go vegetarian, right? I don't call it vegetarian, but that's what it is if you're not eating meat, right?
Right.
And I thought it would be super hard. And I didn't realize how super easy it is to stick to this thing. And it just kind of flows naturally. It was, and I've lost 20 pounds in about a month. No exercise, just shifting that diet like that.
Wow.
because after work I'm tired and I'm like, okay, it's time to go eat, and I start driving to KFC or Arby's and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh wait, those are meat places, right? Where do
Yeah.
I go? So now I end up going to this little Indian restaurant and eating this incredible curry lentil soup with some naan. There's no meat in it, but it's
Sounds
beautiful.
good.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah. I'm not a, go
Mhm.
ahead.
I don't know what you're gonna say.
I'm not a big meat eater myself. But that's not what puts weight on me. It's all the carbs. I love bread. I love fruit. I love
Really?
like every other person in the world. We all love that. You don't love them?
No. I love carbs, right?
Oh.
But this is the phenomenon that I saw. When I lived in Portugal, there were no fat people. And yet these people ate bread every day.
They're not eating processed food. I think that's
the key. So now what I do is I get up 2:00 in the morning. I make my bread and let it sit for 4.5 hours. Around 6:00, as I'm getting ready for work, I leave about 7. I come in, I set it up, I set the oven, let it rest, take a shower, come out, I cut it up, stick it in the oven, have fresh bread in the morning before going to work. And it's just this, and I'm loving myself by being patient and allowing the bread to rest and to go through that process. And I eat far more bread now than I have ever. But the rule is I got to make it.
That's great because you're putting in the time and energy required for it, which is not the same as going down to Krispy Kreme or
Exactly. And on top of it, because I'm building it to eat it, not to keep it on a shelf for 3 weeks. So I don't need to put all that crap in it. That's killing, so it's this idea of you'll probably hear me throughout the next several podcasts talk a lot about it. I'm just obsessed with becoming what I'm calling a classic man.
I'd like to hear
a classic man. Yeah, I had problems saying a conservative man because I'm too artistic to be considered conservative. Even though I consider myself a conservative. But I thought, well, I'm not really conservative because the way that people talk to me, maybe I'm a traditionalist, right? And I'm like, no, women should be free. Right? Like, and I finally just came to this place where I'm like, no, I want to be a classic man, like classic. Like that's the spirit that I want to be in when I talk about art, faith, like knowledge, how we deal with food, that's the energy of my home. And that's the spirit that I'm in.
And yes, and you have that. And I would definitely say that's where you are. That comes through.
Beautiful.
And I bet your house smells amazing in the morning when you're baking your bread.
Heck yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's one of those smells that actually smells better than it tastes. Bread baking. Oh.
I would agree with you. Like I actually love the process more than the final, than the product. And it's weird. Like my bread is not at a place for me that, and this is a standards thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it still tastes doughy, right? And strangely, every time I screwed up, it came out better, right?
Okay.
And so now I'm realizing that, right? So I'm like, wait, I let that thing sit too long and it came out tastier. So now rather than letting it sit for 3 hours, I let it sit for 4.5 hours. And now it's like, ooh. So this is where you have those happy accidents. But then you stop and you analyze and you say, okay, it's not an accident. It's an accident because I was out of control of it.
Right.
But what I stumbled and discovered was, ooh, there's order to this. What's the order so that I may now have authority in it? Right?
Yes.
I don't want to live. I don't want the people around me to not be able to rely on me. You get me? And so
Yes,
I don't want them to say, oh, you're a beautiful random man. just never know what we're going to get with you, you know?
Randomly classic doesn't really go together, does it?
And I've been random most of my life, you know? But,
I love it.
So, Mary, this has been beautiful. We have so much more to talk about and share with each other off this call. And not today, though.
Yes, well, it's been a long call, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Indeed. God bless you. And I'm going to let you end this call with a prayer.
Okay. Oh, you want me to?
Yeah, I started it. You close it.
Great. Oh, okay. Holy Father in heaven, thank you so much for bringing this classic man into my life that has more insight about such a variety of things. I never would have found it anywhere. I would have had to collect it all over the world and bring it into one room. And that's what he is. Thank you so much for him. I'm eternally grateful. And thank you, Lord, for making me one of yours. And I am just grateful. Amen.
Amen.
In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlying structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.